The neon sign trembled as if it were tired of existing. Malloy's the sign, in red and blue letters, flashed erratically on the corner of Route 29, on a strip of asphalt that cut through Virginia like an ancient roadside ditch. It wasn't exactly a tourist spot. It was the kind of bar where truckers stopped out of habit, where construction workers showed up after their shift, where someone could become invisible just by sitting in the right corner. That's why Daniel Mercer chose that place. He entered silently, as if he already knew the choreography. Heavy door, the discreet creak of the spring, the smell of spilled beer, fried food, and wood soaked with years. There was a game of pool going on in the background, a TV with the volume low showing baseball, and an old jukebox that someone had programmed with songs that sounded like a broken promise. Daniel walked to the counter and sat down. Third row from the right, same as always. It wasn't superstition, it was control. From there he could see the door, the bathroom hallway, and the pool table. From there he could perceive movements without having to turn his neck. A bartender, Rita Malloish, wiped glasses with practical patience. She was in her early 50s, her hair tied back, and she had the look of someone who had seen too much and learned not to ask questions. Even so, she always said the basics, the usual. He asked, without smiling much. Daniel nodded. Rita surveyed a bourbon in a lowball glass, without ice. He pushed it towards him as if handing over a document. Daniel didn't take it immediately. First, he looked at the glass. Then, he looked at his reflection in the mirror behind the counter, taking in the entire bar without turning around. Only then did he take the drink in his hand. He seemed like an ordinary man, in his early 40s, with neatly cut brown hair, a bit of stubble, a gray flannel shirt, and dark jeans. Nothing screamed trouble, but there was something about his shoulders, the way he took up little space, the unhurried way he breathed, that gave an unsettling feeling, as if he were always ready for what no one else could imagine. Daniel drank slowly. It wasn't to relax. It was toast time. The door opened again and a cold wind entered along with 3 men. The first was tall and thin, wearing a cap and a fake leather jacket. The second had a swollen, red face, as if his blood wouldn't stop flowing. The third was younger, but with a kind of look that didn't match youth, the look of someone who had already chosen the wrong path and was tired of it. They didn't come to drink. They came in laughing too loudly, clapping, drawing attention. Rita looked at them for a second longer than she should have, and then went back to pretending everything was normal. Daniel continued staring at the glass. The 3 scattered. The one with the cap went straight to the bar, ordering beer in a gruff voice. The one with the red head went near the pool table and stared at 2 men playing. The young man stayed near the door, as if he were guarding it. This distribution wasn't random. It was old, obvious. Daniel recognized the pattern with the ease of someone recognizing weather. The bar had about 15 customers. Most of them didn't want trouble. Trouble is a lot of work, and there was already plenty of work to be had. The guy with the cap took his sips, turned his face to Rita, and smiled in that way that wasn't really a smile. "It's busy today, huh?" he said. "Must have good cash." Rita stood motionless for half a second. Only half. But Daniel saw it. Daniel noticed details that others missed. "It's game day," Rita replied neutrally. "The movement comes and goes." The man ran his hand along the counter, as if testing the wood. Then he touched his own pocket. Daniel didn't need to see the gun to know it was there. The TV continued showing baseball. The commentary was monotonous, and that made the scene seem even more absurd, as if the world had decided to ignore what was about to happen. The one with the cap took a step closer to Rita. "I'll make it easy. You open the cash register and nobody gets hurt. We grab what's there and leave." Rita was not a weak woman, but strength is not the same as having a choice. She looked around, searching for some support, some borrowed courage. The customers looked away. Some fiddled with their phones. A man at the end of the counter took his last quick sip and stood up, trying to leave discreetly. The young man near the door moved and blocked the passage. "Hey, friend," said the young man, almost politely. "Not today." The guy with the cap laughed. Daniel still hadn't moved. He simply breathed. A short breath, then a long one. Inside, his body was adjusting its gears. Rita opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to give in. The argument there would only increase the risk. Daniel knew this, and if he really was the ordinary man he seemed to be, the best strategy would be to remain silent, not to pick a fight, not to become a target. But Daniel was no ordinary man, and that place was the only thing resembling normalcy he still had. He watched the man in the cap pull something from his pocket. It wasn't a big gun. It wasn't a shiny pistol. It was an old, dark revolver, small enough to look less dangerous than it was. The kind of gun someone buys cheaply, unregistered, with no history. The red shirt, near the pool table, pushed one of the players. "Turn your wallet over, champ." The man who had been pushed raised his hands. The bar fell quieter, as if everyone had held their breath. Daniel noticed a detail that no one else had. The man in red wasn't just stealing. He was enjoying it. The man with the cap pointed the revolver at Rita. "Open it now." Rita began to stir. Her hands trembled slightly, but her expression was stubborn. "There's a camera," she said, almost whispering. "You're all going to get screwed." The man laughed even louder. "Camera?" He raised his revolver and pointed it at the corner of the ceiling. "This?" A gunshot rang out in the bar. It didn't hit anyone. The bullet only shattered the plastic of the camera and the plaster of the ceiling. But the sound was like a slap in everyone's face. A scream came from somewhere. A glass fell. Daniel didn't blink. He carefully placed the glass of bourbon on the counter. The sound of the glass hitting the wood was faint, but he did it as a final thought. Then, he took his wallet from his back pocket and placed it on the counter slowly, as if cooperating. The one with the cap turned to him, annoyed. "What's wrong, old man?" he said, approaching. "Want to be a hero?" Daniel finally raised his eyes and looked directly at the man. It was an ordinary look, without any theatrics, but it was firm, like a building level. "No," Daniel replied. His voice was low. "I just want you to turn it down." The cap gave a short laugh. "Look at that." The quiet one decided to speak up. He pressed the barrel of the revolver against Daniel's forehead. Daniel's skin didn't move. His body didn't react with shock. Only his eyes shifted a millimeter, assessing distance, angle, and the tension of his finger on the trigger. "Do you know what happens now?" The man taunted. "I pull here and you pass out." Daniel sighed. A tired, almost sad sigh. "I know," he said. "And you don't know what happens next." The one with the cap frowned, as if he hadn't understood. And that's when Daniel moved. It wasn't as fast as in the movies. It wasn't a spectacular leap. It was efficient. A short-hand movement tilted the barrel to the side as he stood up. The shot was fired, but the bullet hit the wall, shattering bottles behind the counter. Rita instinctively ducked. Daniel gripped the man's wrist with one hand and pushed his elbow upward with the other. The revolver snatched away with a twist, as if the man's arm were merely a clumsy lever. Daniel didn't seem strong. He seemed skilled. He seemed like someone who had done this before in worse places. The man in the cap tried to react with his free hand, throwing an awkward punch. Daniel dodged with his shoulder, landed his elbow on the man's chest, and knocked him against the counter. The impact made the man groan and gasp for air. The bar erupted in panic. Chairs were dragged. People screamed. Someone ran to the back. The redhead noticed and moved forward, making his way between the tables with haste and anger. He pulled a knife from his waist, a serrated blade, and came at him with the aggression of someone who needs to prove something. Daniel held the revolver with both hands for a fraction of a second, not to shoot, but to decide. I didn't want to shooting. Guns were always the last resort, and he knew the weight of that better than anyone there. When the red-haired man came at him with the knife, Daniel took a step back, deflecting the blade by inches. The red-haired man slashed through the air, and the knife hit the counter, chipping away pieces. Daniel seized the opening, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and twisted with a sharp movement. The red-haired man screamed. The knife fell, and Daniel pushed him with controlled force against the nearest table. The man fell on top of him, knocking over beers and plates. The young man near the door pulled out a pistol, now undisguised. It was smaller, modern, with an extended magazine. He pointed it at Daniel, his hands trembling. "Stop!" shouted the young man. "Stop now." For a second, everything froze. The cap groaned on the floor. The redhead tried to get up. Customers cried. Rita trembled behind the counter. Daniel looked at the young man. There was no hatred in his gaze. There was something worse, understanding. As if he had been that young man at some point, obeying orders from more foolish people. "You don't have to do that," Daniel said. "Shut up," the young man shouted, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Daniel slowly raised his hands. One hand held the stolen revolver, but he kept the barrel pointed downwards, away from anyone. "Look at me," Daniel continued, as if he were talking to someone on the edge of a building. "You're scared. If you squeeze, you'll never sleep again." The young man swallowed hard. His eyes were wet, but he didn't know it. The pistol trembled, and then the one with the cap, fallen over, made the stupidest move possible. He tried to get up and grab Daniel's leg to knock him down. Daniel felt the tug, his balance slipping away for a moment. The young man, seeing this, panicked. His finger tightened the trigger. Daniel turned his body at the last second. The shot exploded, crossed the space, and hit, not Daniel, but the mirror behind the counter. The glass shattered and rained down on bottles. Rita screamed. Daniel fell to the ground as well, instinctively using his body as a shield, and pulled his cap down. The revolver flew away. The bar turned into total chaos. The young man stood paralyzed, horrified by what he had done. He stared at the gun as if it had fired by itself. Daniel stood slowly, his hands outstretched. The entire bar was now staring at him, not as a quiet customer, but as something they didn't understand. It was at that moment that sirens began to sound closer. Someone had called the police, perhaps several people. The young man realized his time was up. He ran for the door, pushing past people, and went out into the cold night. The red-haired man followed behind, limping. His cap lay on the ground, clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. Daniel stood still, feeling his heart beat to an ancient rhythm. Rita stepped out from behind the counter and stared at him as if she had seen a ghost. "Who?" she began, but didn't finish. Daniel picked up his own coat from the back of the chair, put it on as if nothing had happened, and looked towards the door, where the blue and red lights already painted the walls. He knew that when the police came in, questions would arise, and questions were the beginning of problems. But the worst part wasn't the police. The worst part was that, when the young man fired, Daniel saw a tattoo on his wrist, a small, almost faded symbol, a triangle crossed by a line. Daniel recognized it. He recognized it all too well, and the last thing he wanted in the world was to acknowledge it. The sirens stopped outside. Car doors slammed shut. Footsteps. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling an entire past awaken within him. And Malloy's, which was just a forgotten bar on Route 29, became the exact place where his life would begin to fall apart again. The door to Malloy's flung open, and the icy air rushed in as if it were part of the operation. Two police officers appeared first, guns drawn, their gazes sweeping the room as if the bar were a crime scene in progress and, in fact, it was. "Hands out," shouted the first one, a big man, by the name Harris, not uniform. The people obeyed immediately. Some raised their hands, others cowered on the ground. Daniel raised his hands as well, but without haste. The difference between fear and discipline was visible. "Are there any injured people?" asked the second policewoman, a woman with her hair tied back, a tense face, and her name, Kelly. Rita replied, pointing to the man in the cap on the ground. "He's hurt." And there was a gunshot. Harris stepped forward, carefully kicking the revolver that was near the counter away. Kelly went to his cap, knelt down, and checked his pulse. "He's alive," she said. "Ambulance now." Outside, more sirens approached. A paramedic entered soon after, carrying a backpack. The scene seemed controlled, but only on the surface. Deep down, there was the turmoil of something bigger, questions, conflicting accounts, witnesses, chaos. Daniel was led closer to the counter, not roughly, but firmly. "You," Harris pointed. "Stay here. Don't move." Daniel nodded. He knew how it worked. He knew how to appear cooperative without giving more than was needed. His stance was a delicate balance, not challenging, not offering himself. Kelly finished adjusting her cap and stood up. Her gaze lingered on Daniel for a second longer than usual. She had noticed. An experienced police officer can tell when a civilian moves differently. "Your name?" she asked. "Daniel Mercer," he replied. "Document." Daniel calmly pulled out his wallet and handed it over. Kelly looked at the driver's license, Address at Culpeper, Virginia. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just an ordinary man. But her face didn't relax. How long have you lived here, Mercer? A year and a half. And what do you do for a living? Daniel took his time before answering. Consulting. Private security. It wasn't a lie. It was just an incomplete truth. Harris was returning from the radio station with a troubled look in his eyes. The suspects fled in a dark sedan, he told Kelly. Heading north. A police car is behind them. Kelly nodded. Then she looked at Daniel again. So, Mercer, witnesses say you disarmed the first guy and took down the second. She spoke as if describing a report, but her eyes were personal. How exactly did you do that? Daniel kept a neutral expression. He knew that any wrong answer would become history, and history would become a record, and a record would become people snooping where they shouldn't. They were drunk, he said. I just reacted. Kelly let out a short, humorless laugh. I've seen drunk people with knives. I've seen drunk people with guns. I haven't seen many cases where people just reacted like that. Daniel took a breath, carefully choosing his words. I served in the army, he said. A while ago. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole picture. Kelly was about to ask more, but her radio crackled. She turned her face away. Central, repeat. The voice from the radio came out metallic. Hurried, Unit 12. The sedan is abandoned near the deactivated gas station on Highway 29. No suspects in the vehicle. We found swapped license plates. I request assistance. Kelly clenched her jaw. Harris cursed under his breath. They disappeared, Harris said. They went into the woods. The paramedic placed the cap on a stretcher. The man groaned and tried to speak, but the pain robbed him of words. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of hatred and fear. That guy, he tried to say. That guy. Daniel didn't look away. Not out of defiance. Out of control. Out of necessity. He knew that if the man survived, he would invent any story to save himself. Kelly was jotting something down in a notepad when Daniel noticed a detail. She was writing his name, but next to it, in smaller letters, she had put a small asterisk. A personal marker. Check later. That was bad. Rita approached Daniel, nervous, but with a kind of courage that came from the fact that this place was hers. He didn't start anything, Rita said, pointing at Daniel. They arrived and threatened everyone. He tried to stop them. Kelly nodded, but her demeanor was still one of investigation, not gratitude. We'll need you at the police station for a formal statement, Kelly told Daniel, today. Daniel felt a knot in his stomach. Formal testimony meant digital, photos, on-camera questioning, cross-referencing of data. It meant that someone, somewhere, could pull up his name and find echoes. Can I go tomorrow morning? He tried, keeping his voice calm. It's late, and today, Kelly interrupted, not aggressively, but with no other option. Harris escorted Daniel out of the bar. The cold bit his face. The headlights of the patrol cars illuminated the fine snow accumulating at the side of the road. Do you have a weapon? Harris asked. No. He is sure. Yes. Harris looked at him, as if deciding whether to believe him. Finally, he simply gestured for Daniel to get into the vehicle. Not as a prisoner, but as a mandatory guest. The Culpeper police station was small, but it had that smell of a place where people come and go carrying shame, anger, and fear. Daniel was put in an interview room with a table, 2 chairs, and a camera in the corner. Kelly came in a few minutes later with 2 glasses of water and a packet of biscuits. That looked like it had been in a drawer for years. It's not an interrogation, she said. Just routine. Daniel nodded. He knew that routine was the polite way of saying, let's see if you contradict yourself. Kelly turned on the recorder. Mercer, describe in your own words what happened. Daniel recounted the story, with enough detail to make it seem real, and with enough gaps to protect what needed protecting. He spoke of the group entering, the gun being pointed, the shot fired into the ceiling, the knife advance. He said he has basic military training, and that he reacted to protect the bartender and the other people. All true, in the most acceptable way possible. Kelly asked questions, many questions. Why was he there? Why didn't he leave when he saw trouble? Why didn't he shoot? Why was he able to take down 2 men? Daniel answered calmly, but inside, he was counting the minutes. The longer he stayed there, the greater the chance that a system would cross-reference his name with something from his past, and he knew that there were databases that weren't visible to ordinary police officers. When Kelly stepped away for a moment to print a form, Daniel was left alone with the hum of the fluorescent light. He looked at the one-way mirror on the wall and, out of habit, tried to see beyond it, as if there were someone on the other side, as if there always were. The door opened again, but it wasn't Kelly. He was a man in a dark suit, with no visible badge, neatly trimmed gray hair, a face that didn't clearly show his age. He entered as if he had permission to exist there, as if the building belonged to him. Daniel felt his body stiffen from the inside, though it didn't show on the outside. The man closed the door and pulled up a chair. He sat down opposite Daniel as if he were sitting down to talk about the weather. "Daniel Mercer," he said, looking at a thin folder, or perhaps I should say, Daniel Mercer, officially. Daniel did not answer. The man smiled slightly. "I'm not a cop." He opened his wallet and showed a card too quickly for Daniel to read completely, but enough to see a word that looked like a punch. "Federal. My name is Graham Weller and I came because what happened at Malloy's caught people's attention. Not the local police's. Other people's." Daniel held his breath inwardly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Weller tilted his head. "You saw the tattoo, didn't you?" Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't told anyone. He hadn't given any indication. Weller opened the folder and placed a photo on the table. It was a grainy, printed image from the bar's security camera before he was shot. In the image, the young man near the door was in profile, and his wrist was visible. The tattoo was also visible, a triangle crossed by a line. Weller spoke softly. "This isn't your average gang. This is a brand we found in places far from Culpier." He paused. "And you're not just a reacting guy. You move like someone trained by some very skilled people." Daniel remained silent. The room seemed smaller. Weller rested his hands on the table. "I'll be direct. They didn't choose that bar by chance. And after today, they're going to want to know who are Yao." Looked Daniel in the eye. "And if you don't tell me now, the next visitor might not be polite." Daniel felt the weight of his entire past press against his shoulders. A past he had tried to bury by changing his name, address, and routine. "What do you want?" Daniel finally asked. Weller smiled, pleased to have gotten that out of him. "I want you to come with me." He pushed a piece of paper at her. It was a card with a number and an address in Washington, D.C. "Tomorrow morning. No police. No testimony. You'll say you're sick and leave. I'll take care of the rest." Daniel looked at the card. Washington meant agency, corridor, doors without signs. It meant people who speak softly and decide loudly. "I've left that life behind," Daniel said, his voice firm. Weller shrugged. "You may have left, but she hasn't left you." The door opened again. Kelly returned, holding the form. She stopped when she saw Weller. "Who are you?" she asked suspiciously. Weller stood up calmly. "Federal matter, official." He quickly showed a badge. "Thank you for your cooperation, Agent Kelly. From here, we'll take over." Kelly turned red with anger. "I am not. That's not a request," Weller interrupted, still politely. Daniel observed everything, remembering that true power rarely shouts. True power simply moves pieces. Kelly stared at Daniel for a moment, as if to say, "I know there's something going on." But she was too small on that chessboard. She swallowed and stepped back. Weller gestured to Daniel. "Early tomorrow," he repeated, and he left. Daniel stared at the door for far too long. Kelly, uncomfortable, tried to resume protocol. "Mr. Mercer, do you know this man?" Daniel picked up the glass of water, took a sip, and lied naturally. "I never saw it." Kelly wrote it down, but her expression suggested she didn't believe it. When Daniel finally left the police station, it was already dawn. The parking lot was almost empty. A light snow fell gently. He got into the car and sat there for a few seconds without starting the engine, just breathing. On the dashboard, the cell phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered. A young, trembling voice, almost crying, spoke from the other end. "I didn't want to shoot. I was just following." Daniel closed his eyes. It was the young man. "Who are you?" Daniel asked quietly. "No, it doesn't matter. Listen. They'll be back." His voice faltered. They thought you were just a quiet guy. Now they think you're a problem. And for them, problems need to be solved. Daniel opened his eyes, focusing on the windshield, where the snow drew lines. "Where are you?" Daniel asked. The young man breathed, as if fighting against panic. "I can't say, but I saw the symbol in your manner. You used to work for us." Daniel felt the world tilting. For us whom? The connection was cut. Dead signal. Or they hung up. Daniel held the phone in his hand, listening to the silence. And for the first time in a long time, he understood that the quiet life in Culpeper was over, because someone from his past had just knocked on the door, using the wrong hands. Daniel spent the night without sleeping. Not out of fear. Fear was a luxury he no longer had. It was out of calculation, the kind of calculation he had sworn he would never make again. He sat in the kitchen of his house, a simple rented home, with minimal furniture and no photographs on the walls. The only personal thing was a coffee cup with a chip in the corner, because he liked to remember that objects break and remain useful. On the counter, an old notebook. He opened it to a blank page and stared at it as if the page could speak. The unknown phone number, the federal agent, the tattoo. That wasn't a robbery. That was a knock on the false wall that concealed a safe. Daniel got up and opened the drawer under the sink. He took out a plastic toolbox. Inside, under wrenches and screws, was a sealed envelope. He tore it open. Passport, a second document, an old cell phone without a SIM card, and a folded, crumpled photo, worn out from being stored and taken again so many times. In the photo, he looked younger. Shorter hair, more rigid posture, less tired eyes. Next to him, a woman smiled restrainedly, Mayan between the two. A little girl with curly hair, holding a popsicle, her face all dirty, Lily. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest. That was the only thing that still truly hurt. The rest was just scarring. He put the photo back, but kept the passport in his hand. It wasn't Daniel Mercer there. It was another name. A name he hadn't used since before Maya stopped answering the phone. He put water on the fire and made coffee, more out of ritual than necessity. At 6 in the morning, as always, he went out for a run. Culpeper woke up slowly. Quiet streets, houses with American flags on the porches, parked pickup trucks. A world that seemed simple, because people needed to believe it was simple. Daniel ran silently to a small park near the road. There, he slowed down and looked around. He wasn't doing this out of unwarranted paranoia. He was doing it because he had learned that normality is a place where you die if you think you're safe. A black car was parked across the street, engine running, tinted windows. Daniel stopped, pretending to stretch. He observed. The car didn't move. It was a presence, a warning. When he returned home, the door was intact, but the mailbox had something inside, an envelope with no stamp, no return address. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside, there was only one sheet of paper with 3 words, printed in plain letters. "You were recognized." He closed the envelope and breathed slowly. This wasn't Weller. It was someone who wanted him to know. Someone who wanted to mark their territory. At 8 o'clock, Daniel drove to Washington, D.C. The drive from rural Virginia to the capital felt like a world-changing experience. Traffic increased, buildings rose, federal signs appeared. Daniel felt a kind of nausea that didn't come from the car, it came from the memory. Weller's business card address wasn't a building with an agency sign on the facade. It was an ordinary office building with discreet security and far too many cameras to be considered normal. Daniel entered, passed through a detector, and was led down a neutral corridor to a meeting room. Weller was already there, drinking coffee as if he were in a hotel. "Punctual," Weller commented. Daniel did not answer. "Before you think this is some kind of trap," Weller said, opening the folder again, "I'll show you why you're here." He placed a set of photos on the table. Photos from street cameras, cell phone captures, enlarged images. The young man from the bar appeared in several, in different places. A parking lot in Richmond, a gun shop in Fredericksburg, a cheap motel near Manassas. His name Isley Navarro, Weller said. 22 years. No record until 2 years ago. Then, he starts showing up in places where we investigate arms and money trafficking, and always near a symbol. He pointed to the tattoo. Daniel looked at the photos with the feigned calm of someone who feels nothing. "And what does that have to do with me?" he asked. Weller leaned forward. "You know," he breathed, as if deciding to stop beating around the bush. "The brand is linked to an old program, a program that, officially, never existed. And that program is connected to people you knew." Daniel felt his jaw clench. "I didn't meet him. I worked with him," he corrected himself, unintentionally. Weller smiled slightly. The bait had bitten. "Then let's stop pretending." Weller pulled out a document and placed it on the table, facing Daniel. It was a sheet with information, locations, dates, code names, and a name at the top that Daniel hadn't seen in years. Operation Ethan Cole. Daniel looked at it as one looks at one's own tombstone. "That's me," Daniel said quietly. "Or rather, it was." Weller nodded. "You left quietly. Medical retirement, transfer of records, a civilian life. We let you go because you deserved it, and because it was cheaper than keeping you." Daniel didn't react, but inside, he felt anger. Not for himself, for being treated like a cost. Weller continued, "But the program that created the symbol didn't die. It changed form, and now we're finding trained, funded people out there. Eli is one of them, and you came onto the radar when you did what you did at the bar." Daniel crossed his hands. "I don't want to go back." His voice came out harsh. "I'm out." Weller looked at him with trained patience. "You're back, Ethan. You just haven't accepted it yet." Daniel hated hearing that name. Ethan was the man he buried every day. "What do you want me to do?" Daniel asked. Weller opened a map on the table. Red markers indicated cities in Virginia and Maryland. "We want Eli alive." He pointed to a spot near Culpier. "He's trying to leave the group. He called you. That means you're the only one he thinks can understand. And for some reason, he trusts you enough to seek you out." Daniel thought about the tone of voice on the phone. The genuine panic. He didn't sound like a cold-blooded criminal. He sounded like someone crushed. "What if he's trying to use me?" Daniel asked. "Maybe so," Weller replied with uncomfortable honesty. "But if he knows things, we need him. And if he's marked for death, we need to get there first." Daniel ran a hand over his face, feeling the weariness. "I'm no longer an agent." Weller pushed another document through. A temporary agreement, consultancy, conditional immunity, a package of legal phrases to make the illegal usable. "You're all we have," Weller said. Daniel read the paper without really reading it. The truth was simple. If he refused, they would use someone else. And that other person would probably die. Eli would die. And if Eli died, whoever came after him could look for other connections. Like Lily, like Maya. The thought came like a knife. Daniel raised his eyes. "If I do it, I'll do it my way," he said. Weller smiled like someone who had won a game. "I expected that." A woman entered the room. She wasn't a secretary. She was someone who walked with the air of someone in charge. Black, short hair, straight posture, a gaze that assessed everything. She placed a folder on the table. "Onus Brooks DHS," she said. "I work with Weller when he needs an adult in the room." Weller rolled his eyes. "Tanya, this is, I know what it is," she interrupted. And she looked at Daniel. "And I know who you are, Ethan." Daniel kept a neutral expression. Tanya opened the folder and showed a recent photo. Daniel recognized it immediately. Maya, older, hair tied back, leaving a building in Arlington next to her. Lily, now a teenager, backpack on her back, headphones on. Daniel felt the air catch in his throat for a second. It wasn't surprising that the government could find them. It was the fact that they were putting it on the table. "Don't threaten me," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. Tanya did not back down. "It's not a threat. It's reality." She pointed to the markers on the map. "If this group is active, if there are people marked with the symbol walking around, then people connected to you become a weak point. And I'm not interested in seeing a teenager become collateral damage because you decided to hide in a small town." Daniel clenched his fists under the table. Weller tried to soften the blow. "We're not using your family against you. We're saying that this is already on the table." Daniel took a deep breath. He hated that they were right. "How do I find Eli?" Daniel asked. Tanya pushed a piece of paper with a number on it. "We tracked a disposable phone connected to a tower near Culpier last night," she said. "He's probably in the area. You'll be back today. You'll maintain your normal routine. And you'll wait for contact. Daniel stood up. I don't wait around, he said. I hunt. Tanya narrowed her eyes. You're not the only one who knows how to hunt. Daniel looked at Weller. If you put a team on my trail, I'll cut off contact, he warned. Weller raised his hands. Okay. Be discreet. You have 48 hours before this becomes a bigger problem. Daniel left the building feeling Washington weigh heavily on his chest. He drove back to Culper with a plan forming, but the feeling was bad. How could he return to a house where he knew someone had broken in while he was gone? Upon arriving in the city, he stopped in the supermarket parking lot to observe the activity. The same red pickup truck he sometimes saw was there, but today there was something else. A man in a blue jacket, pretending to use his cell phone, staring intently in Daniel's direction. Daniel didn't stare. He just memorized. The man was tall, with a sparse beard, and shoes that were too good for someone ordinary. He was being watched. By Weller, by Tanya, or by other people. Daniel went into the supermarket, grabbed random things, and paid. He left and drove to a street parallel to his house. He parked and walked to an alley, observing reflections in shop windows. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. On his way, he passed a trash can and saw something that made his stomach churn. A small, slightly crumpled plastic bag with a cocaine inside. A rubber cocaine with a unicorn design. That belonged to Lily. He knew it. Lily had one just like it when she was a child. He picked up the small bag carefully, as if it were an explosive. Not out of fear of bombs, but because it was a message. Someone had access to things that should have been kept far away. At the bottom of the bag, a folded piece of paper. He opened it. Meeting today, 10 p.m. Rapid and River Bridge. Come alone. Daniel stood still, feeling the afternoon grow cold even under the sun. And I knew, with bitter clarity, that the past wasn't just knocking at the door. He was already inside the house. The Bridge o' Frappahannock, actually a narrower section near Therapeden River, where the water ran dark between trees. It was the kind of place teenagers went to drink in secret, and couples went to argue away from witnesses. At night, it was just a metal and concrete outline in the middle of nowhere, lit by weak streetlights and the headlights of rare cars. Daniel arrived at 9:40 p.m. and parked far away, without turning off the engine. He didn't come armed with a pistol, not for lack of ability, but because a weapon is an invitation to escalate. Instead, he brought what he always brought on bad days: attention, patience, and an escape route. He walked to the side of the bridge and looked at the river. The water made a steady sound, the kind of sound that helps to conceal footsteps. At 9:58 p.m., a car appeared, its headlights on low beam. An old, gray sedan with a broken taillight. It stopped in the middle of the bridge. The door opened and a body quickly emerged. Arrow, thinner up close, deep dark circles under his eyes. The kind of jaw tension you get from not sleeping in days. He wasn't dressed like a criminal. He was dressed like someone trying to be invisible. You came, Eli said, without enthusiasm, just relief. Daniel kept his distance. You called me. He pointed to his wrist. Why do you have the tattoo? Eli pulled up his sleeve, hiding it. Because I was stupid, he said. Because I thought it was family. I thought it was purpose. Daniel looked into his eyes. It wasn't acting. There was real panic. Who are they? Daniel asked. Eli gave a short, bitter laugh. You know, he breathed. You worked on it. You can't pretend you don't know. Daniel felt a cold rage. I've worked on a lot of things, he said. Be specific. Eli ran his hand through his hair. They call ethalotriad now. He pointed to the tattoo. The symbol is old, but they changed the name. They changed everything. But the basis is the same. Recruit young people. Break them down, rebuild them. Teach them to obey. Do favors for politicians, for businessmen, for drug dealers, for whoever pays. Daniel remained motionless, but inside, old pieces were falling into place. He remembered rumors, operations without a signature, people who disappeared. Why are you looking for me? Daniel asked. Eli swallowed hard. Because I saw you at the bar. He took a step forward, but stopped when Daniel didn't move. You moved like the training instructor, like someone who knows. Daniel didn't like hearing that. I am not your savior. Eli laughed again, almost crying. I don't want a savior. I want to get out alive. He pulled something out of his pocket, a flash drive. I have this, and it's worth my life, or my death. Daniel did not extend his hand. What do you have there? Names, roots, payments, and evidence. Eli looked at the water, as if the water could wash away the blame. They're going to do a job in Washington in 2 weeks. It's not a bomb in a building. It's not a movie. It's worse, it's a big accident, an incident that will allow for a new law, a new contract, a new fear. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest. You're saying they're going to manufacture a crisis? Eli nodded. And they'll kill whoever they need to in order to make it seem real. Daniel thought of Tanya, of Weller, of Maya leaving the building, of Lily going to school. The word accident took on a different meaning. Why don't you hand this over to the police? Daniel asked. Eli looked at him as if Daniel were naive. Because they have people everywhere. He took a step back and lowered his voice. And because I know you'll understand one thing. When a system is corrupt, it uses the police as a cover. Daniel remained silent. Eli was right. Not out of romanticism, but because of mathematics. Do you have somewhere to go? Daniel asked. I had it. Eli bit his lip. But I did something. I stole that flash drive. They found out. And now He stopped, his throat tightening. They've taken my sister. Daniel felt his blood run cold. How many years? 16, Eli replied, embarrassed. She doesn't even really know what I do. She just exists. And now they have her. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. That was the red line. It always had been. When children enter the picture, everything becomes a different kind of war. They want a trade, Daniel said. Eli nodded. They want the flash drive. And they want you. Daniel opened his eyes. You? Eli looked at him with genuine fear now. They know who you are. They have your file. One of the guys, the leader, he said your real name. He said Ethan Cole like he was saying coffee. Daniel felt a pressure in his skull, as if the memory were being hammered. Who is this leader? Eli hesitated. Fear changed shape. I've never really seen his face, Eli said. But the name that's going around is. Raymond Voss shows up when he needs to. He's in charge. Daniel heard Voss and a flash went through his mind. A hallway, a man in a suit, a whispered order, an invisible signature. Daniel didn't know if it was a real memory or an association, but the name carried weight. Before he could speak, a sound cut through the air. A dry crack. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed Eli by the coat and dragged him to the ground beside the bridge. A second later, something exploded in the concrete where Eli was standing. Fragments flew. A rifle shot. Long range. Daniel rolled with Eli behind a pillar. Shut up and breathe, Daniel whispered. Eli was trembling like a leaf. Another shot. The metal of the bridge groaned. Daniel looked around, assessing the angle. The shot had come from the edge of the woods, from a higher point. A trained marksman, not a petty criminal. Eli began to cry silently. They found me, he murmured. Daniel felt anger rising, but he kept his composure. They were already here, Daniel said. This was an ambush. Eli looked at him, confused. Daniel continued. The note, the cocaine, that wasn't you. It was them. They knew I was coming. Eli shook his head in despair. I swear that, I believe you, Daniel interrupted. Now do as I tell you. Daniel pulled Eli away from the pillar, crawling to the underside of the bridge. There was a narrow dirt path leading down to the river. He knew the place because he had run there before. A small detail that now meant life. They slid down, slipping in the mud. More shots rang out above. The sound echoed through the structure. Daniel pushed Eli behind a thick tree. Do you know how to swim? Daniel asked. Eli nodded quickly. So you're going to get in the water and go to that bend. Daniel pointed to where the river cast a shadow. Stay low. Don't look back. And you? Eli asked, his voice breaking. Daniel looked at the bridge. I'll figure something out. Eli hesitated. Daniel firmly took the flash drive from his hand. Trust me for 5 minutes, he said. Eli swallowed hard and ran to the water. He entered, panting from the cold, and began to cross. Daniel climbed back up a little, without exposing himself. He picked up a stone from the ground and threw it to the opposite side. The sound made the shooter adjust. One shot shattered the stone where it landed, revealing the man's accuracy. Daniel took advantage of the opportunity and ran under the bridge to a darker area, where there was a trail to the parking lot. When he got close to the car, he saw what he expected and hated. Ellie's sedan was empty. Daniel's car had two men beside it, fiddling around. One of them was holding a handgun. The other was talking on the radio. Daniel stopped in the shade, breathing. He had a choice: run away and leave Eli to fend for himself, or get into a fight he had vowed never to pick again. The promise died on its own. Daniel approached from behind, quick and silent. He grabbed the radio operator by the collar and pulled him back, using his body as a shield. The other turned and raised his weapon. Daniel twisted the first man's arm and pushed him forward. The second man's shot hit his own partner in the shoulder. A scream. Confusion. Daniel knocked the second man down with a blow to the chin, without exaggeration, without sadism. He picked up the gun from the ground and pointed it at the two of them. "Where's Ellie's sister?" Daniel asked, his voice cold. The wounded man groaned. The other spat blood. "Go, screw yourself," the second one said. Daniel took a breath. He couldn't waste any time. Sirens wouldn't come. Nobody would come. He heard a noise behind him. He turned around and saw a third silhouette emerging from the woods with a gun pointed at him. Daniel didn't have time to fight back. He simply did what he had learned over years he didn't want to remember. He calculated that his survival was worth less than the information. The shot didn't come because the silhouette didn't shoot. It only spoke in a voice that was to calm, "Still fast, Ethan." But not fast enough. The voice was masculine, mature, with a familiarity that made Daniel's stomach churn. The silhouette drew closer in the dim light. A man in a dark coat, a neatly trimmed beard, light eyes that seemed devoid of guilt. He smiled. "I am Raymond Voss," he said, as if he were introducing himself at a meeting. "And you just got back home." Daniel kept his gun pointed, but he knew that scene wasn't about the gun. It was about control. Voss raised his hands, dramatically. "Calm down. I didn't come here to die today. I came to talk." He tilted his head. "And to give you a choice." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I don't negotiate with kidnappers, Voss Ryu." "You've dealt with worse things," he replied. "Only before you called them missions." Daniel felt the past biting at him. Voss took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed the screen. A short video. A girl tied to a chair, her face bruised, but alive. She was crying, looking at the camera. "That's Ellie's sister," Voss said. "Okay. For now." Daniel listened to his own heart. "What do you want?" Voss smiled wider. "The flash drive. And you." He put his cell phone away. "Tomorrow, at noon, in Richmond. Alone. If you try to be a hero, she dies, he dies, and maybe your family will be caught in the crossfire too." Daniel didn't move, but the world turned red inside. Voss took 2 steps back. "And before you think about running," he pointed to the sky, "I have my eyes on you now. Always." And he disappeared into the woods as if he were smoke. Daniel stood there with the gun in his hand, the henchman on the ground, and the bridge above still vibrating from the old gunshot. He took a breath, trying to decide his next move. And then his cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Don't trust Weller." Daniel stared at the screen as if it were poison. Weller's name flashed through his mind like a blade. And at that moment, he understood that he wasn't going on a hunt alone. He was entering an internal war, and the enemy might be on the side that seemed right. Daniel didn't go home. Home was a vulnerable place. He drove to a cheap roadside motel, paid in cash, and chose a second-floor room overlooking the parking lot. He went in and checked every corner like an automatic habit, behind the curtain, under the bed, inside the bathroom, even the emergency exit in the hallway. The flash drive was in my pocket, but it felt as heavy as a brick. The message "Don't trust Weller" kept repeating in his head, and Daniel hated it, because he didn't have the luxury of distrusting everyone. He needed a minimum line of communication to avoid becoming an isolated target. He turned on his old, disposable cell phone and inserted a SIM card he kept for emergencies. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, a number he swore he'd never call again. He called 3 times. A female voice answered, dryly, "Try." Daniel swallowed. "Tanya?" he asked. Silence. Then, How did you get that number? I need to talk to you now, Daniel said. Without Weller, you're in trouble, Tanya stated, without asking. Yes, and I think Weller isn't on our side. Tanya was silent for a long second. When she spoke, her voice was lower. Where are you? Daniel hesitated. Giving out his location was risky, but he needed to place his bet on someone. Near Culpier. Half true. I'm in contact with Eli, and the leader showed up, Raymond Voss. On the other side, Tanya let out a gasp as if she had been punched. Is Voss alive? She asked. And it's working, Daniel replied. He kidnapped Ellie's sister, and he threatened my family. Tanya became tense. Ethan, she said, using his old name without asking permission. If Voss is at the table, this is much bigger than Weller let on. Then tell me the truth, Daniel insisted. Who is Weller? Tanya breathed. Weller is useful. The word came with a bad taste in his mouth. He acts as a bridge between agencies, carries information, puts out fires, but he's always in the middle of things when they're shady. Always. Daniel closed his eyes. I received a message telling me not to trust him. And you trust anonymous messages? Tanya retorted. I trust the pattern, Daniel replied. And the pattern is screaming. Tanya remained silent. Then, the meeting in Richmond. Are you going? Daniel looked out the motel window, watching cars coming and going. I'm going, he said, because there's a girl in jail. If you go alone, you die, Tanya said bluntly. Then I'll die trying, Daniel replied. Tanya let out a humorless laugh. You're still the same idiot. I'm the same father, Daniel said, and the sentence came out without him planning it. On the other side, silence. Tanya spoke, more softly. I'll help you. But if I help you, I'll become a target too. She paused, and there's no such thing as perfect protection. I know. Give me a location in Richmond, Tanya said. A public place. I'll keep watch from afar. No police car, no vest, no show. Just cover. Daniel thought quickly. Richmond had old areas, abandoned warehouses, bridges. Voss wouldn't choose a place with too many cameras. Voss would choose a place where he had control. He hasn't given the exact location yet, Daniel replied. Just Richmond at noon. He'll send it, Tanya said. When he sends it, you send it to me. And Ethan, she paused, if Weller shows up, you act normal. Don't confront him. Just observe. Daniel hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. The motel smelled of stale cigarettes. The TV was off, but the hum of silence was loud. He needed another piece. Eli. Was Eli Free alive? In the river? Daniel wasn't sure. He hadn't seen Eli come out of the water. He just believed. At 9 a.m., the disposable cell phone vibrated. A message, I'm alive. In hiding. They killed the guy with the cap. IT was to silence him. You're going to force me to give IT back. What do I do? Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. At least Eli was alive. He replied, don't expose yourself. Don't trust anyone. VOSS wants you as bait. I'm going to Richmond. You stay put. Eli replied almost immediately, my sister. Daniel typed, I know. And he erased the rest. There was no promise that wasn't a lie. At 10:45 a.m., another message arrived, this time from a number Daniel recognized, Weller. We need to meet. Now, you're out of protocol. Daniel felt his body stiffen. Weller was tracking him, or he had people tracking him. Before I could reply, another message arrived. Unknown number. Just coordinates and some text. Docs. Old warehouse 7.1 to H. Pendrive plus you. Alone. Voss. Daniel sent the coordinates to Tanya without adding anything else. Then Weller replied, I'll call you later. And he turned off his main cell phone. He was left only with his disposable one. He drove to Richmond with tension clinging to his skin. The city was noisier, more alive, more indifferent. Old buildings mixed with revitalized areas. Enormous bridges, the James River flowing as witness. The old docks were located in a somewhat abandoned area, with dark brick warehouses and rusty tracks. Warehouse 7 looked like a sleeping monster, with broken windows and a metal gate half open. Daniel parked some distance away and walked. The wind carried the smell of water and iron. He entered the warehouse and felt the immediate change, echo, cold, and a sense of space where any sound gives it away. Ethan, a voice came from the back. Voss appeared, emerging from behind a pile of crates. He wasn't alone. 2 armed men flanked him. A third held a camera, as if he wanted to record. "You came alone," Voss observed, pleased. Daniel kept his hands visible. "Where's the girl?" he asked. Voss smiled. "Calm down." He gestured, and a man pulled a metal chair forward. "Sit down." Daniel didn't sit down. "I didn't come here for dinner." Voss shrugged. "You've always been dramatic." He held out his hand. "The flash drive." Daniel took the flash drive out of his pocket and showed it, but didn't hand it over. "First, I see her." Voss gestured. A man brought a tablet and turned on a live video. Ellie's sister was in a dark room, tied up, breathing rapidly. She looked exhausted, but alive. Daniel felt relief and anger at the same time. "Now," Voss said, "give it to me." Daniel threw the flash drive on the floor, sliding it towards Voss. It wasn't carelessness. It was strategy, to force Voss to look down for a second. A second is everything. But Voss did not stoop. He had one of the men pick it up. It was as if Voss were reading Daniel before Daniel acted. "Still trying," Voss commented, amused. "Do you think I survived this long being stupid?" Daniel remained calm. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "You already have what you came for." Voss Ryu. "I want to close an account." He moved closer. "You left me with dirty hands in that operation and Alapoyu walked away clean. I was left with the trash." Daniel felt a nagging memory. Aleppo, a deal gone wrong, people dead, an order from above that no one took responsibility for. "You chose this," Daniel said. Voss pointed a finger. "You too." And then, as if it were part of the show, the warehouse door flung open. A man rushed in. "Sir, there's movement outside." Voss didn't seem worried. Obvious. Daniel heard a car braking in the distance. Quick footsteps, voices. And a voice that Daniel recognized without needing to see. "Ethan, where did you go?" Weller entered the warehouse, accompanied by 2 men in suits. He seemed irritated, but behind the irritation, there was something more. Haste. Greed. Daniel understood. Weller wasn't there to help. He was there because he wanted to be there when the flash drive changed hands. Voss smiled, as if he had planned this as well. "Ah, perfect," Voss said. "The meeting is complete." Weller stopped, seeing Voss. His face hardened. "Voss," Weller spat out the name as if it were a disease. "You're turning this into a circus." Voss shrugged. "Circuses make money." Daniel looked from one to the other, and the puzzle became clearer and more disgusting. Weller and Voss knew each other too well. Weller turned to Daniel, his voice low. "You ruined everything, Ethan. I could have ended this cleanly." Daniel felt his blood boil. "Clean," he repeated. Weller breathed angrily and gestured to one of his men. The man raised a pistol and pointed it at Daniel. "Grab him," Weller ordered. Voss raised his hand. "No," he said with calm authority. "Ethan is mine." Weller stared at Voss. "You're not in charge here." Voss smiled. "I'm in charge of what I bought." And then, a sound cut through the warehouse, not a gunshot. A metallic clang. A smoke grenade rolled across the floor, releasing a dense cloud that filled the air. Someone shouted. Daniel didn't wait for a vision. He moved on instinct, grabbing the arm of the nearest man and knocking him down. He heard gunshots, but the smoke obscured his direction. In the midst of the chaos, Daniel heard a female voice on the radio and recognized it. "Ethan, go out the side." Now Tanya. She was there, and she had set off smoke. She wasn't playing around. Daniel ran toward the wall where he knew there was a service door. He felt an impact on his shoulder, a blow, perhaps a grazing shot. He couldn't tell. The adrenaline wouldn't let him. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the gray light outside. The wind blew the smoke back. Daniel ran between containers, hearing footsteps behind him. A black car pulled up and stopped sideways. Tanya opened the passenger door. "Come in," she shouted. Daniel entered, and Tanya took off. In the rearview mirror, Daniel saw Weller leave the warehouse, furious, and Voss staying behind as if it were all part of the plan. "You were right," Tanya said, driving with hard eyes. "Weller's sold." Daniel was panting, feeling his shoulder burning. "And the girl?" he asked. "She's still with Voss." Tanya gripped the steering wheel. They kept the flash drive. She looked at Daniel for a moment. "But now, we know where the switch happened, And we know Weller is dirty enough to expose himself. Daniel stared at the street ahead, watching Richmond pass by in a blur. Voss won't let her go, he said. He'll use her to drag me back in. Tanya nodded bitterly. So we pull it back. Daniel clenched his fist. Not out of anger, out of resolve. I want my family out of this, he said. Tanya looked at him seriously. Then you're going to have to finish this in a way that leaves no loose ends. And Daniel knew that the final chapter wouldn't be about being a hero in a bar. It would be about surviving the system he helped create. Tanya took Daniel to a place that didn't exist on GPS. A discreet warehouse without a sign in an industrial area far from the docks. Inside, it was simple. A table, screens, maps, equipment. It wasn't a Hollywood headquarters. It was an improvised support point for people who know that bureaucracy gets in the way when time is short. Daniel cleaned the wound on his shoulder himself. It was a deep cut, but not fatal. The blood had stained his shirt and made his body feel heavier. Still, he seemed more alive than he had in years. Tanya threw a cell phone onto the table. Weller's car was tracked, she said. I managed to do it because he's arrogant. He uses a safe vehicle thinking nobody has the courage to steal it. I do. Daniel looked at the screen. A dot was moving toward a secondary road, heading north. He's leaving, Daniel said. Tanya nodded. He's going to try to disappear before someone in DC connects him to Voss. She opened a laptop and showed another screen. And I got something else, an address linked to Voss, a place where he keeps people before they move. An old house on the outskirts of Ashland, 20 minutes from here. Daniel took a deep breath. Is the girl there? I'm not sure, Tanya replied honestly. But it's the best chance. Daniel looked at Tanya. You're risking your career for this. Tanya shrugged. I'm not doing this for you. She paused. I'm doing it because I'm tired of seeing secret program turn into a crime and a suit. Daniel nodded. That was the most useful truth. Then let's go, he said. Tanya held his arm. You're not going alone, but you're also not going with a noisy crew. She pulled open a drawer and took out a light, discreet vest. I have to local contacts. Ex-military, now private security. They hate Voss for personal reasons. They'll help. Daniel didn't like it. The more people, the greater the risk. But he knew that doing it alone was suicide, and suicide doesn't save hostages. Okay, he agreed. But I'm in charge of the operation. Tanya smiled slightly. Of course he's in charge. You've always been this unbearable. They left into cars. On the way, Daniel sent a short message to Eli, using the same SIM card. Voss used you. I'm going to get your sister. If I don't come back, run and disappear. Eli responded with an okay that seemed too small for the size of his life. The house in Ashland was old, with a wooden porch, surrounded by trees and an unkempt lawn. There was a car parked behind it, and dim light in the windows. Daniel observed for a few minutes, from a distance, with binoculars. He saw movement of two people inside, a shadow passing by. No child visible. Entering through the front is asking to die, one of Tanya's contacts commented. A man named Mark, scare face, steady hand. The other one, Drew Lesh, had a more attentive, quieter look. He pointed to the side. Basement window. It's half open. Daniel nodded. I'll go through the basement, Daniel said. You guys cover the back and sides. Tanya, you stay in the car and monitor. If things go wrong, you call for real federal backup. Tanya grimaced. I am the real reinforcement. Not today, Daniel replied. Today you're the one on the way out. Tanya didn't like it, but she agreed. Daniel crept up from the side. The cold made his breath steam. He reached into the basement window and pulled slowly. He made no sound. He entered carefully, landing on a cement floor. The smell of mold and old paint filled the air. He heard voices above. Men talking. No laughter. A working tone. Daniel stepped up a step, stopped, and listened. He picked up his old cell phone and put it on silent. His heart was pounding, but his body was in control. At the top of the basement stairs, there was a half-open door. He saw the room, an old sofa, a table, two guns on a cloth, and a man sitting cleaning a pistol. Another man stood there fiddling with his cell phone. Daniel waited for the moment when the standing man turned his face toward the window. He climbed up in a short, silent movement, crossed the distance, and grabbed the man's arm. Pulling him back, the man's hand tried to scream, but Daniel already had his other hand covering his mouth. "Don't shout," Daniel whispered in his ear. "You're alive." The man froze, sensing the message. The man on the sofa raised his pistol, but Jules outside smashed the window with a swift impact and pointed his gun from a distance, shouting, "Go away." The man on the sofa hesitated and let go, because hesitation is a survival instinct when the situation changes rapidly. Daniel knocked the first man to the ground and tied his hands with a plastic cable tie he took from his pocket. He also restrained the second man with the help of Mark, who entered through the back door. "Where's the girl?" Daniel asked directly. The man on the couch swallowed hard. I don't know," he stammered. "We just keep." Daniel tightened his grip on his collar without hitting him. "You know." The man nodded toward a hallway. "Back room. Downstairs. Through a false door." Daniel let go and ran down the hallway. There was an old cupboard. He pulled it out and saw a small door on the floor with a hidden handle. He opened it. Short staircase, smaller basement, dim lighting. And there, in a chair, she was. Ellie's sister. White eyes, bruised face, but alive. When she saw Daniel, she tried to speak, but her mouth was taped shut. Daniel carefully removed the tape. Who are you?" she cried. "A friend of your brother's," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice human. "I'll get you out of here." She began to tremble. They said they were going to kill him. Daniel breathed. "Not today," he said, and he hated his own certainty, because certainty was a promise. They went upstairs quickly. Tanya appeared in the doorway, now armed, breaking her own rule because the situation demanded it. "Let's go," she said, now. They put the girl in Tanya's car, covered her with a coat, and left before any neighbors noticed. On the road, Tanya called a contact within the system, someone who still owed her favors. She activated a discreet unit to pick up the girl safely, without involving the local police station. "She'll be safe," Tanya said, looking at Daniel. "I'll put her in out-of-state custody for a few days." Daniel nodded, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. "And Voss?" he asked. Tanya gripped the steering wheel tightly. Voss wasn't there. She glanced at the tracker screen. "But Weller is still moving. And this is our route." Daniel understood. Catching the girl was saving a life. Catching Weller was cutting the net. They tracked Weller's car to a roadside gas station near Fredericksburg. Girl stopped to refuel, probably thinking he still had time. He didn't. Tanya parked far away. Daniel, Mark, and Jules approached on foot, discreetly, using parked cars as cover. Weller came out of the store with coffee in hand, talking on his cell phone, his face tense. Daniel heard part of it. "I told you that the flash drive," and then Weller saw Daniel. His face froze. The coffee fell. "You," Weller began. Daniel didn't point a gun. He just approached calmly. "It's over," Daniel said. Weller took a step back. "You don't understand," Weller said quickly. "I was controlling this. Voss is a cancer. I was using him to win," Daniel interrupted. "To sell information. To cover our tracks. To keep the game going." Weller breathed nervously, and he made the fatal move. He reached inside his coat. Mark and Jules reacted. Weller was knocked to the ground in a second, arm twisted, gun taken away. Tanya appeared, badge in hand, voice firm. "Graham Weller, you are under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of a federal investigation," she said. "You will cooperate, or you will rot." Weller laughed, with blood at the corner of his mouth. "Do you think arresting me will change anything?" He spat. "This is bigger than me. Bigger than Voss. This is the system." Daniel crouched down, facing him. "I know," Daniel said. "I lived inside him." Weller glared at Daniel with hatred. "You are also guilty." Daniel did not deny it. "I am," he said. "And that's why I'm not going to let you continue." Tanya called for backup. Federal vehicles arrived discreetly, without sirens. Weller was taken away. But Daniel didn't feel victorious, because Voss was still at large. And Voss was the kind of man who doesn't lose. He only postpones. That night, Daniel returned to the motel. Not to sleep but to think. Tanya texted. The girl was safe, under guard. Eli had been located by her and placed under temporary protection. Daniel should have felt relief. but his body wouldn't relax. At 2:17 a.m., the old cell phone vibrated. Message without a number. No identification. You chose the girl, good. Now choose yours. Daniel felt his heart stop for a second. Then a photo arrived. Lily, leaving school, captured from afar. Daniel stood motionless, the world shrinking to the size of that image. The second photo came soon after. Maya was in the building's parking lot, looking around as if she sensed something. Daniel squeezed the cell phone until it hurt. Tanya had said there was no such thing as perfect protection. Now he saw the proof. He could no longer stay out. He called Tanya immediately. "They have my family in their sights," Daniel said. Tanya was silent for half a second, and then her voice became steely. "I'm going to get an escort now." She paused. "But Ethan, if Voss wants you, he'll try to pull you away from them. He wants you to choose." Daniel stared at the empty motel wall, as if nothing could provide an answer. "I've already made my choice," Daniel said. "I'm going after him." Tanya breathed. "Do you want to kill him?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about everything he had done, about everything he had seen, about how many times he had thought that solving meant erasing. "I want to stop him," Daniel said finally. "Dead or alive, but in a way that doesn't create another Voss tomorrow." Tanya remained silent. When she spoke, her voice was tired and sincere. "Then you're going to have to expose everything," she said. "Not just arrest them. Expose them. Shed light on them. Burn the map." Daniel understood the price of this. Exposing meant exposing himself as well. Ethan Cole, the mistakes, the operations, the man he was. He looked at Lily's photo again. "Burn it," he said. "Everything." In the following days, Tanya moved the pieces. Documents were copied, backups made, evidence distributed. Eli, under protection, revealed names and routes. Weller, cornered, began to talk to reduce his sentence, and each of his words was more fuel. Voss tried to escape, but now there were spotlights, not just from the agency, from the media, from rival politicians, from people who wanted to stay away from the fire. 2 months later, Voss was captured at a small airport, trying to leave with a false identity, not because justice was perfect, but because he lost what he always relied on, his shadow. Daniel watched the news in a cafe in Arlington, from a distance, wearing a regular baseball cap, like any other man. He saw Maya across the street, entering a building, Lily beside her, laughing at something on her phone. He didn't come closer, not yet. Tanya sat down next to him, placing a cup of coffee on the table. "You're officially out again," she said. "And now, more people know than needed to know. There will be consequences." Daniel looked at the two of them from a distance. "I've been paying the consequences for a long time now," he said. Tanya remained silent, then asked, "Are you going to talk to them?" Daniel took a deep breath. His fear wasn't Voss. It was looking into Maya's eyes and having to explain why he disappeared, why he chose to survive away from them. "One day," he said, "when I'm sure the wind has stopped." Tanya stood up. "The wind never stops, Ethan." She gave a half smile. "You just learn to build a house that can withstand it." She left. Daniel stood there, watching, not as a persecuted man, but as a man who, for the first time in a long time, had done something that felt right even if it had torn pieces of him away in the process. He stood up and walked in the opposite direction, blending into the crowd or still, but no longer invisible to himself. And for the first time since that night at Malloy's, he allowed himself a dangerous idea. Perhaps he could become human again. No excuses, no mask, just a present,